Okay. Excellent. Hey, you guys. Thank you so much for having me. I wish I could be there in your pretty city and enjoy it, but things didn't work, and there we are. But this is almost as good. Um, you guys know I'm Sharon Burton. I'm willing to bet if I was in the room, I probably know most of you. But in case you don't know me, I've been in the technical communication industry now for 20 years, which I find remarkably surprising. I, like most of us, fell into this, and it was literally something that made money while I was in graduate school, and I certainly didn't think it would be something I would be doing, for very long. And now 20 years later, I'm still having a wonderful time. So I think it sticks. I solve business content and social media problems for companies. So I do content strategy consultant stuff. I teach communication at various universities. And really kind of the place that I'm interested in lately is I've been doing some research into, do users use product documentation, and if so, when, and what do they think about that? And the reason I'm interested in these questions is TechCom adds value to the post-sales process of a company, and it turns out, here's a little piece of information for you guys, it's easier to sell to people who've already bought from you. I think it's like 80% of the cost of, 80% of the marketing dollars the company spends goes to acquiring new customers, but yet returning customers are actually a better source of revenue. And that post-sales experience depends on, in large part, can the customers use the products they bought from you? And it turns out, no surprise to us, that product documentation is a big part of being able to use the product. So we not only, reduce customer support calls and all that, we are supporting that whole branding effort our companies are doing, that, our products are easy to use, we really care about you, all of that. And that's kind of where I'm interested in lately. So I'm doing research on that stuff. I'm writing articles. I'm doing various things. And when I'm not doing all of that or working for clients or dealing with my many, many, many students right now, I knit and I garden and play with my dog and do all that kind of stuff. That's kind of what I do. So, so there we are. All right. So let's start with a definition. What is user content? What is content that is for users? And whatever definition I come up with, it's probably changing as I speak. But let's try. User content is content that is created to face the customer. Now, that may be content that your team or your company is creating. It may be content that your customers is creating. And it certainly could be social media. People could be tweeting about your company or your products. And not just tweeting, I love this company or I hate this company, but tweeting their experience with the product or the experience with the services. Tweeting questions about how do I. I saw that we've got several people, at least one person from Salesforce. I know that you guys, number one, you do a rocking good job with your social media, and I see people tweeting about Salesforce all the time. Not just, I love Salesforce, but how do I in Salesforce? Those kinds of questions, and people respond to those things. That's content created to face the customer. Then there's user forums. Most of us work at companies that have some sort of user forums, or that there's a LinkedIn group that is maybe a user forum. And these people are often asking each other questions and responding with answers. And very often they're about our product. Then there's whatever blogs our company might have, whether it's a corporate blog or it is a more technical blog or product-specific blogs, or some companies like Adobe, they've got like 700 corporate company blogs. This is content created to face the users. There's wikis. There's notes passed around the office. I'm sure I'm the only one who's ever, seen that, but there's that kind of stuff. Then there's those things that are, informal job aids, all of this stuff. All of this stuff I sometimes call ad hoc content, and I call it ad hoc content for a reason. Because you may or may not have any control over this content, which means the kinds of standards and format and structure that we like to impose on content may or may not be there. So we don't really necessarily very often have control over that. Now, if your company is hosting a user forum of some sort, whether it's on LinkedIn or it's on your corporate site, we will often have some control over that. We as technical communicators, we may have some control over that. In that, we'll be able to go in and maybe edit things for clarity, edit them for language, that kind of thing. But if you've got a user forum that, for example, you don't host, like LinkedIn, you probably, you being your company, probably doesn't really get to go in there and edit people's comments for clarity. I can't think of another way, a better way to say we're Big Brother and we shall edit your posts, like editing people's posts to a LinkedIn group. That's pretty aggressive. If your company has a wiki, and that's becoming very popular for developers' sites, there'll be a wiki that's for the developers. You have possibly have some control over that. You can go in and, again, edit it for language, structure, etc. But if your content, if the discussion about your products is happening on somebody else's wiki, you don't really have any control over that. You just get to cringe and go, ooh. Or at most, you get to post things like, well, that's not actually completely correct. But you don't get to make sure that that content follows any kind of structure or style guides. You just don't. Online help, we have control over that. Because very often as technical communicators, we're the ones who are creating it. So we have control over that. And very often, if our online help allows comments, we have control over the comments depending on what tool we're using and how that's implemented. We have control over the comments. So we can decide to have a comment show. We could edit it for language, that kind of thing. Community blogs, people who just really love your products, and so they love posting about them, we have no control over that. None. The most we can do is make frowny faces and occasionally suggest in a comment maybe that, well, there's a better way to do that because. Corporate blogs, we very often as technical communicators, we have no control over that. And most corporate blogs really suck, so we don't really have any control over that. And if we spend any time looking at that, that just upsets us. Which leads me to, we are increasingly being asked to be responsible for user-generated content in some manner. And because we don't have enough to do, right? We're all sitting around going, if only there was something else for me to do. I guess I'll just knit today. I'm sure that's happening. If we have control over the content, that's fine. We can be responsible for editing it, for monitoring it, for moderating it, for those kinds of things. But if we don't have control over it, then there's really nothing we can do about it. And that's actually I've actually met people who really had a hard time making this clear to their management that if there is a user group or an enthusiast of your product who is posting things on their blog and they're getting things wrong, you don't have any control over that. You can't make them correct the errors or whatever it is that, and it is surprising to me that some people don't understand our sphere of power. We can't make most people do things. And this brings us to the corporate blog. If your corporate blog really sucks and you don't have any control over it, stop looking at it. It's just going to make you upset. So stop looking at it. It's somebody else's hands, not being done the way you want it. Just leave it be. Now, something interesting. Customers are more willing for ad hoc content to be messy and ugly. But I did a survey last year, and I'm thinking about running it again, asking people how forgiving they were of this ad hoc content, having typos, that kind of thing. And people are remarkably intolerant of that. And I had expected that people would be much more tolerant of typos, that kind of thing. As long as you could generally make it out and it's generally accurate, I expected people to be fairly tolerant. And it turns out, no, not so much. Not so much. So because our content is the official content, it's important that we understand that that's really the only content we have any control over, and that our content is representing the company as well as it is the source of accuracy for our products. Other people, groups, etc., may be doing ad hoc content, but since we don't have any control over that, there's not a lot we can do about that. All right, so there's the definition. Ad hoc content versus official content. We have control over the official content. So what is success? Because we need to understand what is success so that we can understand what it means to have a successful project. We don't understand what a successful project would be, then we have no way of knowing if we've ever hit the mark. So one of the things that you need to think about is setting expectations. When you say that you're going to have a successful project or you had a successful project, what is it that you mean by that? Do you mean that you delivered it on time? Do you mean you delivered it within budget? Did you mean that you delivered the content that you said you would? Did you mean that it was accurate? These are all good things, by the way. These 4 things, these are all very good things. But for most of us professional technical communicators, for us, these 4 things are given. We will deliver it on time within budget. We deliver what we say we'll deliver, and it'll be as accurate as we can possibly make it. But then there are these other business things that can also mean a successful project. We're all familiar with the idea that good product documentation can reduce support costs, which it absolutely can. It will not eliminate support costs because there are always people who wish to have someone tell them, and so they're going to call. You can't get rid of it, but we absolutely can reduce it. We can also engage post-sale customers in the product suitability, usability, all of that, and increase return purchases. And this, in case you're wondering what I mean by why that's important to the corporation, what this does is it drops the cost of getting a customer, because we've already spent the money to get the customer. They bought the product. They liked the product so much, they bought another one. And we didn't have to do much to do that except give them good product documentation. That's it. Since hopefully we're giving them good product documentation anyway, the cost of that customer's purchase drops because we didn't have to spend the money acquiring a new customer. We just went back to the well. And look, there was water in it. How wonderful. So there are other ways to define success. You can come up with 15 more different ways to define success. And you can use all of these. You could use some of these. You could use none of these. You can come up with your own definition. But we definitely need to define what we mean when we say successful. Now, that's for us technical communicators. But our management also has a definition of what they mean when they say a project was successful, at least for other projects in the company. So if they point to a development project and they say that was a successful project, they have a metric that they're using to measure what they mean. It may be similar to what ours is, but it's probably different. And I'm not saying it's absolutely different, but it's probably different. Why is it probably different? Because it is. They're probably measuring things like total number of man-hours, growth after planning, those kinds of things. And it is important for us to understand what the definition is that that management is using when they point to other projects, and then use that definition too. Now, our projects are slightly different, but they're not that different. So we may want to throw in something like reduce support costs or contributing to post-sales product happiness or something like that. I don't know. But we probably want to extend it to cover one of the things that excellent product documentation can do for a company. But let's start small. So when you start defining successful projects for your company, adopt the definition that's being used by your management for other projects, and then throw in one of the things that you think that Docs adds or is a thing to measure you guys by. Understanding that you're going to change this over time, because what we do is very similar to development, but it's also got some differences. We are similar to development, but we are also similar to marketing. So we stand in this kind of gap between with a leg on each side, and because of that, we can't just adopt what development uses, but we also can't point to just what marketing does either and take their definition. So we start with development, and then we kind of evolve that definition over time. Now, if you are being handed ad hoc content, and I'm hearing of TechCom people who are actually starting to move into the social media space for their company, which I think we totally can go. I think that's a great place for us to go. Social media content may have a different metric for success than internally created content. And that's, again, over in that marketing side. So you'd want to start looking at what does marketing mean when they say they have a successful project, and use that definition. Success for English content projects may be slightly different than the localized content project. If you are throwing in localization as one of the things that you want to measure to say you've been successful, then you're probably going to throw in something like cost of localization, because we all know that localizing one language can often cost almost as much as it costs to create it for the first time in English. So the ability to write in standards with perhaps a standardized language can really reduce those localization costs. And so that's a way to measure success. We delivered on time, in budget, and dropped the localization cost by 30%. That's a great metric, and it's really nice. Now, I've mentioned, we're kind of standing in that with one foot on either side of the gap with marketing. Marketing certainly has a different metric for measuring success. They are measuring both how much it costs to gain customers, and then, here's the big hint, it also involves how much post-sales customer experience drives future sales. So, and that's part of why I'm interested in that. I'm interested in these business drivers that eventually, when you really look at them, walk right back to product documentation. And so I'm real interested in that area. All right, so we've defined success, which is good. We figured out how management wants to talk about it. We've added some of our own stuff to it. Now that we have a definition for success, it's time to start evangelizing that. And that means telling people, keeping your definition of success to yourself in a very selfish, I'm not going to share it with you, I'm just going to tell you we've had successful projects. That's not so helpful. You have to actually get it out there so that people understand a successful documentation project is measured by the following. Now, not everybody's going to get on board. We know that, because there are, bless their hearts, people who really do believe the myth that, well, nobody reads product documentation, which, by the way, is wrong. I have proof that's wrong. If they're right, nobody sits down and reads the product documentation because they can't wait to find out how it all turns out. Nobody does that. I can't wait to get to the last chapter. I know it's going to all come to a good conclusion. I know it. No, that's not going to happen. But people do read our product documentation, and they read it a lot, and they're counting on it as the official word. This is how the product is supposed to be used. So for the people who are just committed to that position, you can point to what you're measuring as success, and then when they say, well, I still think product documentation costs too much. Frankly, I don't know why we have a product documentation group. our products are perfectly easy to use. You say, well, I understand that you feel that way, but we've decided that we need product documentation, and we've decided to measure success by the following metrics, just like you're measuring success. That's why you take management's version and then extend it. Just like you guys measure success for your projects, we're taking many of those same things, and then we're adding these other things because we've got this funny stuff that we do, but basically that's why we're doing it. And the reason you have to evangelize it is most companies, although this is starting to change, and I could not be happier, but most companies still don't understand how product documentation happens. As far as they can tell, elves come in the dark of night, and they weave paper into docs. They don't understand the process. They don't understand why they can't just give us a badly written spec, and then we can write all the docs. They don't understand why we spend hours asking questions. They just don't get it. They don't understand why we can't write about features that don't exist yet. They're just locked up in some developer's head. Well, why can't you document that? Well, it doesn't exist yet. Well, it will, though, so just go ahead and write it. Well, but you see, it doesn't yet. Well, but it will. It is. And since it's a mystery how docs happen, part of evangelizing the definition of success means that you are also, kind of by definition, exposing how docs happen. Because the stuff you're measuring is the stuff we're doing and the result of what we're doing. So you're also exposing that. And it's a good thing. It's a good thing. In a room full of 20 tech comics people, I typically have 1 or 2 people who go, no, we don't have to expose what we do. What we do is too important to expose. No, really, every single place I have worked with where we have exposed the process of how product documentation works, every single time it has resulted in management getting it. And very often getting it to the point where they're willing to fund initiatives they weren't funding because they didn't understand why on earth it was needed. And that's part of my job as a consultant, is to come in and help make that case and expose that stuff and then point to and see, if you spend this much money here, let me show you where you're going to be reducing money there. But we can't do that until we've measured what we mean by success. So there are subtle ways to evangelize. You don't have to wander about the hallway stopping people at random saying, let me tell you about the docs. You can evangelize it through status reports, so you can do it in kind of an up-managed way. Project reports, perhaps your team has a weekly project meeting. I have a client that I'm wrapping up with right now. They have a bi-weekly project meeting, and the project manager is amazing, and they really value documentation because their customers really count on it. And so she always talks about any successes that the Docs group has had, along with support, along with product development, along with sales, along with everybody else. It's all just part of the product. And that really increases the visibility. And when the group has a win, just like they do for the other groups, everybody goes, yay, yay. So it's really nice. Staff meetings can be a great way to evangelize. You can talk about, we've hit these metrics, we're on track for this, et cetera, et cetera. The corporate newsletter is not a place that most people think about, which always mystifies me. Again, because TechCom likes to hide itself under a rock for some reason and pretend that, well, it's mysterious. We don't know. We go in our office and we close our door, and then later documentation comes out. No, corporate newsletter. Talk about, we've released X number of docs in Y number of languages, and that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. Any of you who have been through localization know just getting one language out can be, interesting. If you've managed to do a release with 10 languages, that should be in the corporate newsletter. That's a big deal. So that's a great place. Planning documents. Anytime you're doing planning documents, you can set up your metrics as part of the success, which is fabulous. Chatting in the lunchroom, depending on your political environment, that can be a great place. Sometimes soliciting opinions from others. You can talk about, well, we are measuring our docs projects now by the following metrics. Are there any that you can think of? What does your group use to measure success? And then if you get, stupid ones, then you just ignore them, right? But you make it, you get people involved. You get them thinking that docs projects can be, and I'm doing air quotes here, successful, and there are ways to measure that. And that can be a real eye-opener for some companies. It had never occurred to them that they should even do this, much less that there is a way to measure it. So that can be fun. All right, so we've defined what we mean by user content. We have looked at what we mean by successful, because we can't begin to think about any of the other stuff until we understand those two. So now that we've got that stuff in place, planning is still planning. Regardless of what it is you're doing, planning is still planning. So I say, sit down and figure out your quality metrics. Start with the basic characteristics for 3 or more quality levels for your publication project. So, for example, level 1, the minimum quality will be no index, no examples, but by God, we spell checked it. Now, I'm hopeful that nobody's going, yes, that's a very good metric. We like that one. We use that one every day. No, that's not a good metric. I'm just saying it's the minimum metric. Level 2 might be we verified it against the software. It's indexed, spell checked, and we copy edit it because we built time into our project to copy edit, which is always fun and exciting. And so that would be a level 2, for example. A level 3 might be this is the place that we're hoping to go. We've optimized it for readability. We've optimized it for comprehensibility. And we have optimized it for localization. Now, what do these 3 mean? We have dropped the reading level, for example, to 5th grade level. Why 5th grade? Because the average reading level in the United States is now 5th grade. So we have dropped the reading level down to 5th grade. We have made sure that we have structured the content similarly, so it is comprehensible, it is understandable, we don't have any tortured, painful sentences. And we have structured our language. So we are using whether we use standardized English or we come up with our own, we've come up with a way of talking about things that is standard regardless of where we talk about them, and we're all using that language, and life is all good. That's going to cut down significantly on localization, by the way. All right, so when you're planning your project, in case you were wondering, does that hours per page metric still work? The hours per page metric can still work. It absolutely can. But there's some, when you're developing a standard work per page estimate, remember to include, and this is the part that I see people forgetting, include the time it takes to manage the project, to research and interview, to write and then edit, to do illustrations, because you need to be doing illustrations. You need to support your visual learners, even if they're just flowcharts. With luck, you've got somebody on your team who's pretty good at visuals, and maybe they do more visuals than they do writing. Maybe. I'm not particularly good at visuals, so mine are always kind of stupid, but Visio is your friend, because at least it handles the basics of that. Proofreading, don't forget time to proofread. I think we're all probably, okay, maybe I'm the only one who's ever released stuff. I've never had time to proofread, but it's scary how much stuff I've released in my lifetime that I've not had time to proofread. Time to translate. And by translate, I don't mean just send it out to the translation company and then, whatever, right? There is stuff you need to do before you send it out, like making sure that the language is all there, making sure you've got the glossary put together, et cetera, et cetera. And that can be a giant time sink. Even if you've already got a glossary, you've still got to go through and make sure the glossary is up to date for this particular release. That takes time. Preparing for publication or publishing to your multiple targets. In today's world, as you guys know, we don't just get to throw online help PDFs over the wall anymore. So we need to think about this, and it takes time. For example, the client I'm wrapping up with right now, They have a set of user guides for their flagship product, and I believe there are 8 user guides in that doc set for different audiences and different things, but they're all out of a similar set of FrameMaker files, and it takes about 3 days to create those deliverables through using conditions and various things, and it never goes well, and yeah, all of that. And then, of course, there's attending project meetings, attending review sessions, and then, you know, at your company, there's all kinds of other things that need to happen as well. All right. So if you're looking for, well, example, hi, Pesca, my Australian Shepherd just came in here sniffing me. So if you're thinking, okay, well, what are some averages? I don't know where to even start. Give me some numbers to start. Here are some numbers to start. I am not saying these numbers reflect what you do. I am saying that these numbers are pretty darn good numbers to start with if you don't know what numbers to use for planning. So, for example, if you're doing a user guide, typically 2 hours a page is probably going to be okay. Now, if you are doing developer documentation and you are not experienced at doing developer documentation, I would double or triple that, because you're probably going to have to come up with your own examples, et cetera, so that may take much longer. A training guide, usually about 30 hours of work per 1 training hour. By the way, that number has been true for at least 15 years, and I think our tools have gotten much better, but it still seems to be true. About 30 hours for every training hour. It's amazing. And so on. I don't need to read it to you guys. Now, the new one that I've not seen in any of the standard text is cleaning up ad hoc content. When I've been asked to clean up ad hoc content, I'm estimating typically about an hour per 500 words, because ad hoc content is not written with a consistent vocabulary. It's not written with best practices for organizing information. It's not written, it's not written, it's not written. So very often it borders on the incoherent. I'm not saying that our users are bad. I'm just saying they're not professional writers. And so very often you wind up having to pull the whole thing apart to understand what it was that was trying to be said, so then you can put it all back together. So I usually estimate about an hour per 500 words. Again, your mileage may vary, but if you don't have numbers for yourself for how long things are taking for you, these are good numbers to start with. All right, common estimating errors I run into. The first non-zero probability, which I always love, which is the first possible date the project could be completed, which is usually the date that people push you on. When you say, well, I've put together the plans, it's going to take until next March to do this with the content that we've all agreed we're going to have, everybody says, no, not March. No, we're thinking the middle of January. So that'll work, right? Most of us often fall apart right there. Well, yes, I'll just write really fast. The answer to that is no. If that's really what they want, then some decisions are going to have to be made. Then there's the guess factor. This is the one that especially independent contractors will get themselves into trouble with constantly. They'll do a flat rate project because flat rate projects make clients happy. They like that because then the costs are knowable. And the independent contractor will say, well, I think it'll take, I don't know, optimistically X, and then I'll add a little bit more and then multiply that by my hourly, and that's a flat rate project. And that often does not go well. And it doesn't go well because you've not actually done any planning. You've just kind of said, well, I think it'll take me this much. And then they're horrified to discover that their hourly rate winds down to like minimum wage because they massively misestimated it. And then there's the devoutly desired results project planning, which is when everybody at the table turns to you and says, so when can you have the docs ready? And then they smile at you. And you don't dig in and say, I don't know, I'd have to plan that. You just look at everybody and go, January? And everybody beams, oh, well, that's very good, January. January is very, very good. and then you're just hoping like crazy you can make that happen. Not so good. So some things to think about when you walk away from the table after they've all looked at you and you said, well, I really have to go plan that. You want to think about external factors. Are there things that are beyond your control? Perhaps your most senior writer is totally available for this project for the next 2 months. She knows the product line. She knows what's going on. She knows everything, and then she's going out for 4 months on maternity leave because she's going to pop a baby. Really, if we make it 2 months, I'll be surprised. That's something to think about. How stable is the product? Is there a spec? Or if you're working in Agile, does the team know what they're doing? Has this team ever turned out a product when they said they would that actually functions? I hope I'm hearing laughter.
Yeah, you're hearing laughter.
Yeah, okay. Again, I'm probably the only one who's worked with teams like this. But, seriously, if the team has never turned out a stable product in the time frame that they said they would, what are the odds that you're going to be able to meet your deadlines? Not so much. Information availability. I'm not seeing this happen as much as I used to, but I understand there are, in fact, still projects where project managers say things like, I don't want you talking to the developers. It's just going to upset them and distract them. Ask me all your questions, and if I think it's important, I'll pass them along. And you just go, seriously. Not so good. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm just going to touch on some of these that I think are really big. Audience understanding is huge. I've got a client I'm working with in Omaha, super nice people. I love them. And by the way, Omaha is a rockin' city. I am amazed. I thought I was going to be bored out of my mind. Not at all. It is the coolest place. They have more restaurants per capita than any other city in the United States, including New York City. And they're not like McDonald's. They're top-of-the-line restaurants. I was amazed. So I'm working with a client in Omaha, and they've never formally identified their audience. And because of that, nobody's really understood what it is that needs to go into the online help or the PDF and why it should go there or shouldn't go there. And so, as it turns out, the customers are dramatically unhappy with the docs, and they're missing the mark completely with the documentation, completely. We're working on putting that together now. But big surprise, right? So this audience understanding, for me, is a critical one, because until we understand who our audience is and what their needs are, I don't understand how we can even begin to do anything. And then the team experience is another one that's big on me. If you've pulled together a whole bunch of people who've never worked together before and they're frankly a little suspicious of each other, that's going to be a tougher project than a group of people who are willing to hold hands and jump because they trust everybody on the team. That trust is a big issue. All right, and then there's the product development environment. So there's the waterfall environment, which is iterative with a lot of planning. This is a pretty good place for the docs group because there's all kinds of phases. There's lots of specking. It typically shows up now in government projects and in hardware projects, because hardware projects, at some point, you've got to have a thing to send to the factory so they can actually build it. And that doesn't work so well in the Agile environment. An Agile environment definitionally is, agile and fast on its feet, and you can't have a product changing every day and then send that to the factory every day and ask them to build you one of those. Oh, no, wait, one of these. Oh, no, we've changed it to this. It doesn't work. Although, I'll bet you, those of us who've done consumer hardware stuff, there are phases of a waterfall project where, in fact, that happens, but everybody knows that happens. That's built into the process. And then at some point you start circling around the prototype and you start working it out. Then there's the Agile environment, which I actually find a very exciting environment. I really like it. It's the environment where customer stories drive development. So you have short sprints, if you're in it, you know it. There's not a lot of planning, very short planning. Typically, this happens in software. Again, you can't really do this with hardware. It's a very unstable environment, and it's a very fast environment. And I like those environments. I think they're fun. I mean, they can be crazy making, but they're also fun because I think they're real creative kinds of environments, and I really like that. I can get bored in a waterfall environment because I can. But the Agile environment for me is much more fun and much more creative with all of the things that fall out of a fun, creative environment. It's not stable. Things change quickly, etc. But it can be fun. And then there's the mix of both. Some companies choose the attributes that they like from both of these ways, of both these environments, and then kind of build their own. And typically they still call them Agile, which I find amusing. Because it's like, well, no, actually, because we have a very firm spec, we're definitionally not Agile, but okay, I got it. All right. Regardless of the environment you're working in, do some planning. Do some planning. Really, do some planning. If you're in an Agile environment, it's tougher, but you can manage the content that you're going to do by the sprint. Because everybody knows what they're doing in this sprint, you can figure out what you're going to do. What are the customer stories, and then what content do the customers need to support that story? And the answer may sometimes be none. It may be the customer doesn't need any documentation for these customer stories. And sometimes the answer is, oh, dear God, this is going to kill us. And there you are, right? I have an Agile client, and one of the smartest things that they did, this is the client I'm wrapping up, before they brought me aboard, one of the smartest things the Docs manager did is she decided that Docs was always going to run one Agile release behind. And that has kept us sane, because this is a particularly large group, and it is globally distributed. And because of that, there's a lot going on. And because the group runs one Agile sprint behind, there's some breathing room. Now, sometimes an Agile sprint doesn't require any docs for them. In that case, that lets us catch up. And so that most of the time we are delivering up-to-date content. When we hit that delivery date, we're delivering content that is aligned with what's being released. But we set the expectation that Docs would run one Agile release behind, and built that into, this Docs manager was really smart, built that into her definition of success. So it's good that she set up that expectation. All right, so deliverables, they are changing. As we are sitting here, somebody is coming up with a whole new deliverable we haven't thought of, but we're going to have to account for. So here are some good examples of deliverable kinds of things. Hard copy, which, believe it or not, is still getting delivered. PDF, online help, offline help, ebooks, smartphone content, tablet-ready content, HTML5, multiple languages. I'm hearing of device-sniffing content that is self-aware and knows what device it's being viewed on and adjusts itself for that. There's the Write Once, Reuse Many that supports all. This is a wild west of delivery time, and I couldn't be more excited about this. I frankly got bored in the last, I don't know, up until about 3 or 4 years ago. I was kind of bored with our deliverables. I'm not bored anymore. It's really, really fun. Repurposing content for PDF, online help, ebooks, and then doing it in multiple languages, setting up those processes and the right tools, etc. That's fun stuff. It's crazy. Maybe I just need a life, but I'm telling you, it's fun stuff because it's just fun. These are fun problems to solve. So the way we were doesn't work anymore. We don't even call it single sourcing anymore, guys. For those of you who might be old enough to remember when single sourcing showed up, we all went, well, no, that'll never work. That'll never fly. Well, it flew, and it flew so well that we're calling it an entirely different beast now. Now it's called, I love this phrase, multi-channel publishing, because I guess single sourcing didn't cover it, right? But to be fair, multi-channel publishing is really including the idea that we're not just delivering PDF and online help. We're setting up our content to be delivered any way it needs to be delivered. And that's exciting. We're not creating content for books anymore. And creating content using the book metaphor is getting more and more difficult and more expensive, because the book metaphor locks our content into files. Typically, the smallest piece of content in a book is a chapter. Chapter can run 40, 70, 100 pages. And we can't get at the pieces of the content in the chapter and reuse those effectively. Not if we're using a book metaphor. Yes, it can be done. If you're authoring in frame, you can absolutely chain together a whole bunch of small pieces into a chapter. But the overhead can be a nightmare. So a lot of companies, in case you were wondering, a lot of companies are looking at new tools, new technology, new process. What is it we need to do? Because a lot of companies have been caught flat-footed on this. They didn't realize that we were in this Wild West and that we were really going to have to support what we need to support now. So a lot of companies are looking at, okay, do we need new tools? Do we need new technology? Do we need new processes? Do we need to revisit how we create our content? Do we need to move to topic-based authoring? If we do, what does that mean? What's best for us? All of that stuff. So if you've been wondering, you've been thinking, gosh, I'm kind of getting this feeling, the ground is moving, which as Southern Californians and San Francisco people, that metaphor resonates for us more than it does for others, that, gee, I feel like things are moving under my feet. Is this something I should be doing? The answer is yeah. Yeah, it is. It is time to start looking at all of this. And things are moving so quickly, I'm telling clients you should be revisiting these decisions, or at least checking in with these decisions every 2 years, because things are changing rapidly. All right, that was an hour. Woohoo! I made it. I know. I've been watching the clock and looking at my content going, oh gosh, I don't want to go over time. It's so irritating when you go over time. All right, I'm going to stop recording. So hang on.